I was 19 years old at the time. I was a college student living off campus in a small town in Pennsylvania. It was a normal weekday evening, and I was doing something I had done hundreds of times before. There was no reason to think anything bad was about to happen. I had just finished dinner and went to my room to work on an assignment. My roommates were out, and the house was quiet in a normal way. The kind of quiet you don't even notice. The heater was on. My phone was charging. Everything felt routine. I remember checking the time. It was a little after 9 p.m. I still had hours before I planned to sleep. I locked my bedroom door out of habit, not because I felt scared. The neighborhood was considered safe. Mostly families. A few students. No history of break-ins that I knew of. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. While it booted up, I heard a noise from downstairs. It sounded like a door closing. Not slamming. Just closing. I didn't react at first. Old houses make noise. The floors creak. Doors shift when the air changes. I told myself it was nothing. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps this time. Slow. Heavy. Moving across the living room floor. I paused my music and listened. The sound stopped. I assumed one of my roommates had come home early and forgot to text. That happens sometimes. I almost called out, but I didn't. Something about the silence afterward made me hesitate. I waited. 30 seconds passed. Then, a minute. That's when I noticed something small that didn't make sense. The light under my bedroom door was gone. The hallway light was always on at night. Always. We never turned it off because the switch was at the bottom of the stairs. But now the glow under my door was completely dark. I stood up and walked closer to the door. I didn't open it. I just stood there listening. I could hear breathing. Not loud. Not fast. Just steady. Like someone standing still, very close to the door. I told myself I was imagining it. Stress does that. Long days do that. I even leaned my ear closer, trying to prove myself wrong. The breathing stopped. Then I heard something else. A soft scrape. Like fabric brushing against wood. That's when my phone vibrated. A message from one of my roommates. I'm staying out tonight. House should be empty. I read it twice. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there in the dark, realizing that whatever was outside my door wasn't supposed to be in the house at all. The house was an old two-story place near the edge of town. It had been split into student rentals years before we moved in. For bedrooms, one narrow staircase, thin walls. It wasn't creepy, just outdated. The kind of house where you hear pipes knock and floors creak when the temperature changes. I had moved in 3 months earlier with 2 other students from my college. Mark had the room downstairs. Evan lived in the room across the hall from mine upstairs. That night, both of them were out. Mark was visiting family. Evan was at a party and said he might crash at a friend's place. That left me alone in the house. It was late October. The air outside was cold, but the house still held heat. The windows were shut. The curtains were drawn. There was a steady hum from the heater that filled the background and made everything feel normal. Safe. I stayed in that night because I had a midterm the next morning. I didn't feel like going out. I ordered food, ate at my desk, and planned to study for a few hours before sleeping. It was just another quiet college night. Earlier that evening, I had taken the trash out and double-checked the front door. It locked automatically, but I always made sure. Same with the back door that led to the small yard. I remember doing it because I had my headphones in and almost forgot. I went back inside, shut the door, and didn't think about it again. The house had no security system.
No cameras.
Just basic locks and a porch light that barely worked. We never felt the need for more. Break-ins weren't common in that area. Most of the neighbors had lived there for years and kept to themselves. Inside my room, everything was familiar. My desk lamp was on. Clothes were folded on a chair. My backpack sat by the door. I had my phone, my laptop, and a cup of water beside me. Nothing felt off. That night felt like every other night I had spent there alone. I was comfortable with the silence. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't alert. I wasn't looking for danger. That's what made what happened later so unsettling. Nothing in that house warned me ahead of time. Nothing suggested that normal was already over. After reading the message from my roommate, I stayed still for a long time. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe Evan had come back and left again. Maybe the hallway light burned out at the same time. It all sounded possible, if I didn't think too hard. I went back to my desk and sat down, but I didn't turn my music back on. The silence felt heavier now. I could hear every small sound in the house. The heater clicked on and off. Pipes shifted in the walls. Somewhere downstairs, something creaked, like pressure being put on the floor. I checked my phone again. No new messages. I didn't text anyone. I didn't want to look paranoid. A few minutes passed. I tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting toward the door. The gap under it stayed dark. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I had lived there long enough to know the patterns of the house. That light had never gone out on its own. Then I heard movement again. This time it was clearer. Footsteps. Slow and careful. They came from the bottom of the stairs and stopped halfway up. Whoever it was wasn't rushing. They weren't trying to be quiet either. It sounded like someone who didn't mind being heard. I held my breath and listened. The steps continued, one at a time, wood creaking under weight. They reached the top and stopped. I could tell exactly where they were standing, right outside my room. I waited for a knock. Or a voice. Something normal. Nothing happened. Instead, I heard a faint sound, almost too soft to notice, like fingers brushing along the wall, moving slowly, back and forth. The sound passed my door and moved toward the bathroom, then came back again. I stood up without thinking and locked my door again, even though it already was. The click sounded loud in the quiet room. The movement stopped. For a few seconds, everything was silent.
No breathing. No footsteps.
Just the low hum of the heater. Then the floor creaked again. A single step backward. Whoever was out there hadn't left the house. They had just moved away from the door. That's when I felt it. The clear sense that I wasn't alone anymore. And that whoever else was there knew exactly where I was. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. I stayed where I was, standing in the middle of my room, listening. My heart was beating fast, but my mind felt oddly calm. I kept telling myself to stay quiet and think. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. Time felt stretched. Every sound in the house seemed louder now. The heater shut off, and the silence that followed felt too complete. Then I heard the stairs again. Not going down. Coming back up. This time the steps were heavier. Slower. The wood groaned with each one. There was no attempt to hide the noise. Whoever it was wanted me to hear them. They reached the top and stopped. I could see the shadow of feet under my door. Barely visible, but there, facing my room. I backed away until my legs hit the bed. I looked around for something to use as a weapon, but there wasn't much. A desk chair. A lamp. Nothing that felt useful. The door handle moved. Not fast. Just a slow turn. It stopped when it didn't open. The handle went back, then turned again. Harder this time. I stepped back another pace.
My phone was in my hand now.
I didn't remember picking it up. My finger hovered over the screen, but I hadn't called anyone yet. I was scared that the sound would give me away. The handle stopped moving. I thought maybe they had given up. Then I heard something scrape against the door. Metal. It slid down the wood, leaving a faint scratching sound, like someone testing the surface. Feeling for a weak spot, I felt trapped. There was only one way out of the room, and it was blocked. The window faced the backyard, 2 stories down. Jumping wasn't an option. The scraping stopped. Silence again. Then a voice spoke from the other side of the door.
Low. Come.
Almost polite. I know you're in there. That was when I realized this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion or a roommate misunderstanding. Whoever was outside my door had come here for me. The moment he spoke, I called 911. I didn't care anymore if he heard it. I pressed the phone to my ear and whispered my address as fast as I could. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. On the other side of the door, he reacted right away. The handle rattled hard. The door shook as his weight hit it. Not full force yet, but enough to make the frame creak. I backed into the corner near my desk, keeping my eyes on the door. The operator told me to stay on the line. She asked if I could get out safely. I looked at the window again. The yard below was dark. I could barely see the ground. I told her no. The banging stopped suddenly. For a second, I thought maybe he had run. Maybe hearing the call scared him off. Then the door handle turned again, slower this time. More controlled. I heard a sharp crack like wood splitting. Something was being forced between the door and the frame. I grabbed the desk chair and shoved it under the handle, pushing with my full weight. The door pushed back. The frame groaned. Dust fell from the top hinge. He spoke again, closer now. "Open it. I don't want to hurt you." I didn't answer. The pressure on the door increased. The chair slid an inch across the floor. My arms burned from pushing. I could hear him breathing on the other side. Heavy and steady. He wasn't panicking. He was focused. The operator told me police were on the way. I asked how long. She said a few minutes. The door suddenly stopped moving. I heard footsteps move away, fast this time. I didn't relax. I stayed pressed against the chair, waiting. Then glass shattered. The sound came from downstairs, the back of the house. I realized what he was doing. He was looking for another way in. I dragged the chair aside and ran to the window. I unlocked it and pushed it open. Cold air rushed in. I didn't think anymore. I climbed onto the sill and dropped. I hit the ground hard and rolled. Pain shot through my ankle, but I got up and ran. I didn't look back. I ran barefoot through the yard and into the street, screaming for help. A neighbor's porch light turned on. A door opened. I collapsed on the sidewalk just as police cars pulled up, lights flashing. They went into the house with guns drawn. I sat there shaking, listening to the radio chatter, knowing that if I had waited even a little longer, I wouldn't have made it out. I gave my statement sitting on the curb, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers handed me. My ankle was swelling, but I barely felt it. All I could think about was what was happening inside the house. The police stayed in there for a long time. Longer than I expected. I kept watching the front door, waiting for them to bring someone out in handcuffs. Every time an officer stepped outside, my stomach tightened. Finally, a detective came over and crouched in front of me. He asked me to go over the timeline again. When I finished, he nodded slowly, like he was putting pieces together. Then he told me something that didn't make sense at first. They hadn't found anyone upstairs. The door to my room was damaged, just like I described. Scratches on the wood. The chair pushed out of place. But there was no one hiding in the house. No signs of a forced entry through the front door either. I told him about the glass breaking downstairs. He looked at me for a second before answering. The back window had been broken from the inside. That was when the situation shifted. They found a backpack in the laundry room. Inside it were gloves, duct tape, a flashlight, and a folding knife. There was also a bottle of water and a phone charger. It looked packed, like someone planned to stay for a while. Then an officer found something worse. In the spare room at the end of the hallway, the one we used for storage, the closet door was slightly open. Inside, they found blankets on the floor, food wrappers, a small pillow. Someone had been living there.
Not just that night.
For a long time. The detective explained that there were signs the person had been inside the house for weeks. Maybe longer. They had memorized our schedules. They knew when people were home, and when they weren't. The most unsettling part came last. They checked my bedroom door more closely. On the inside edge of the frame, just below the handle, there were faint marks. Small indentations. Like something sharp had been pressed there over and over again. The detective said it looked like someone had practiced prying the door open before.
Carefully.
Quietly.
Testing it.
He believed the man hadn't planned to confront me that night. I wasn't supposed to be awake. When the police finally caught him, it wasn't inside the house. They found him 2 blocks away, hiding behind a shed. He tried to run when they approached. He was carrying the knife from the backpack. I never saw his face again. But knowing he had been inside that house while we slept, knowing he had watched us without being seen, that changed everything I thought I understood about safety. I wasn't unlucky that night. I was almost too late. I moved out of that house a week later. I didn't argue about the lease or ask for my deposit back. I packed what I could during the day and never went back alone. The place felt different now.
Smaller.
Like it had always been occupied by something I just hadn't noticed. The police told me the man was being held while they investigated other break-ins in the area. They said he hadn't said much. No clear motive. No explanation for why he chose that house or how long he had really been there. Eventually, they stopped calling with updates. Classes went on. Life went on. On the surface, things returned to normal.
But small habits changed.
I lock doors without thinking now. I check closets before sleeping. I listen longer than I used to. Some nights, I wake up for no reason at all.
No noise.
No movement. Just a sudden feeling that something is off. When that happens, I stay still and listen the same way I did that night. I asked the detective once if they ever figured out how he first got inside. He told me they couldn't be sure. No forced entry. No broken locks. Just a back window that could be lifted from the outside, if you knew how. That answer still bothers me. What bothers me more is something I didn't notice until weeks after I moved out. While unpacking, I found my old laptop. I turned it on to recover some files. When it booted up, a notification popped up from the cloud backup. There were video files I didn't recognize. They were short clips, each one time-stamped late at night. The camera angle was low and steady, like it had been set down somewhere. When I opened the first video, my stomach dropped. It was my room. The angle faced my bed. The room was dark. I was asleep in every clip. The sound was just quiet breathing. I closed the laptop and shut it off. I never watched the rest. The police couldn't trace where the files came from. They said it might have been malware.
A glitch.
Something technical. But I know my laptop camera light. I know when it turns on. And I know I never slept with my door unlocked. Sometimes I wonder if the man they caught was the only one inside that house. And sometimes, when my room is quiet and the lights are off, I still feel like I'm being watched. I don't check the camera anymore. I moved 3 more times after that year. Different cities. Different apartments. Each place newer than the last. Better locks. Better lighting. Places where neighbors were always around. On paper, I did everything right. It didn't change much. The police eventually closed the case. The man took a plea deal for trespassing and attempted burglary. They never charged him with anything else. They told me there wasn't enough evidence to connect him to the videos. No fingerprints on my laptop. No clear proof he was the one who recorded them. Officially, the files had no source. I tried to accept that explanation.
I really did.
I deleted the videos. I wiped the hard drive. I even replaced the laptop. But deleting something doesn't erase the memory of seeing it. I still remember details I wish I didn't notice. The angle was too perfect. The camera was placed somewhere low, like on a shelf or the floor. And in one of the clips, right before it ended, there was movement near the door. Not entering, just shifting, like someone adjusting their position. That part plays in my head more than anything else. Years later, I requested the police report. I wanted closure. I wanted to read it and convince myself it was over. Most of it matched what I remembered.
Dates. Times.
Evidence logged. But there was one line that stopped me. During the search of the house, officers noted signs of more than one sleeping area. Plural. I called the department to ask about it. The officer I spoke to said it was probably a wording mistake. Maybe they meant different spots used over time. He told me not to read into it. I didn't argue, but I didn't forget it either. Even now, I never sleep with my bedroom door open. I don't use smart devices with cameras. I cover lenses with tape. I double-check locks every night, even when I know they're secure. Sometimes, when I wake up suddenly, I listen for breathing that isn't mine. I wait for the sound of movement just outside the door. Most nights, there's nothing. But every once in a while, I'll notice something small that doesn't make sense. A chair angled differently than I remember. A door not fully closed. My phone screen lighting up, even though I didn't touch it. I always find a logical explanation. I have to. Because the alternative means accepting something I'm not ready to face. That someone learned my habits once. that someone watched me sleep, and that I never truly knew how many people were inside that house with me. The worst part isn't what happened back then. It's the thought that whoever recorded those videos knew how to leave without being noticed. And if they could do it once, they could do it again. I don't talk about it much anymore. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've learned how people react. They nod. They go quiet. Then they change the subject. Stories like this make people uncomfortable, especially when there's no clear ending. But for me, it never ended. A year after everything happened, I got an email from my old landlord. He said the house had been sold. Before closing, the new owner hired inspectors to check the walls and wiring. During that process, they found something behind a loose panel in the upstairs hallway. A small hole. It wasn't part of the house design. It had been drilled cleanly, then covered from the outside with a thin piece of wood. From inside the wall, it looked straight into my bedroom, right toward where my bed used to be. The inspector assumed it was old damage, maybe from renovations. The landlord asked if I wanted the report. I told him no. I already knew what it meant. After that, I started noticing patterns. Not just fear, but behavior. I avoid rooms where the door faces the bed. I never sit with my back to an open space. I map exits without thinking about it. Friends joke that I'm paranoid. I don't correct them. Every now and then, I'll get a notification on my phone saying a login attempt was blocked. Wrong password. Unknown location. It happens even after I change everything. Support teams say it's automated activity.
Bots.
Random scans. Maybe they're right. Still, I don't ignore it. What stays with me the most isn't the man at the door. It's the patience, the planning, the fact that someone could live quietly inside a shared space without being detected. That kind of behavior doesn't come from impulse. It comes from practice. Sometimes I wonder how many other houses he stayed in. How many people never realized they weren't alone. How many cameras were never found. I've tried to convince myself that the person they arrested was the end of it. That he acted alone. That everything else was coincidence, layered on top of fear. But there's one detail I've never been able to explain. The night I escaped, when the police were searching the house, an officer asked me how many people lived there. I told him 3. He wrote it down, then paused. He asked, "Are you sure?" I didn't understand the question at the time. I said yes. He didn't explain why he asked. I think about that moment a lot now. Because if someone can watch without being seen, record without being noticed, and leave without a trace, then the scariest part isn't that it happened once. It's that you might never know when it happens again. And the reason I still sleep lightly, the reason I still listen in the dark, is because the last thing I ever heard before I jumped out that window was breathing that didn't sound surprised. It sounded patient.